Hey everyone, it's Kong again, and here's another episode of Should You Summon? As always, I'll be presenting high-level overviews using these two criteria to help you decide whether this banner is worth your hard-earned vouchers and crystals. Since this is a crossover event, we can get the other two normal criteria out of the way in advance. First, these characters don't unlock any bonds, and none of them rely on anyone else for their bonds. They just need to be upgraded through their various class trees. Second, for availability, these are limited heroes, so they're not going into the general summoning pool after this banner is over. Unless the event gets a rerun, this is our last chance to summon for them. And even if it is going to get a rerun, at Zilong's current pace, we wouldn't see it for another 18 to 24 months anyway. So let's get right into this crossover Raid Up banner featuring two new characters, RYO Sanada and Kayura. This banner runs from July 29th to August 11th. Since it's not a Destiny banner, you do have a 40% chance of getting each on-banner character, with the remaining unlucky 20% of course reserved for any other off-banner hero in the regular summoning pool. As a bonus, we'll also take a quick look at the free SR character you can get from the accompanying Secret Realm event next week, Toma Hashiba.
Together, they face the otherworldly forces of the evil dynasty, calling on the spirits of ancient samurai warriors. All five have been given super-powered fighting skills and weapons to wield against this tyranny.
Justice!
Might,
Wisdom! Trust! To arms!
heroes pushed to the limits.
Wait with me!
A struggle between good and evil, and the fate of humanity hangs in the balance.
And now that I think of it, the only thing that could really make a cool crossover like this even better is a cool community crossover of our own. I happen to know a guy who likes protagonists, so everyone please welcome Fjarlar of Wikigrisser fame. Alright Fjarlar, tell us about these characters.
So let's take a look at RYO, the fearless leader of the Ronin Warriors. One look at RYO's kit will tell you everything you need to know about him. This guy is all about single target damage, and he's probably the strongest one they've ever added to the game. Aside from having the typical things you would expect out of a single target damage dealer, like attack boost, damage boost, and a nice soldier multiplier, the most unique thing about two of RYO's skills is that they attack twice. Now players who really like using Leiden as their tank will know how strong a double attack can be, but imagine that with an offensive talent on your back, doing it while you have a skill multiplier, and using soldiers who aren't just doing scratch damage. That's really RYO's unique role in a nutshell. So this guy is found in the Protagonists, Yllis Legends, and the Heroes of Time factions. Now right off the bat, this is kind of an awkward combination. There are some players who would go as far as to say that having the Protagonist faction is really not that different from having no faction in that slot at all, because Protagonist only has one buffer and he really isn't that great. The Legend faction does better, but they still have some problems. You're gonna have to rely on Landius a lot if you want that buff. Sigma of course is also a Legend faction buffer, but it's pretty well known that he's not that great at carrying the faction buff. Heroes of Time is again kind of an awkward faction, although RYO does a little bit better with it than a lot of other units. Yusuke and Joshua of course are the most seen Time faction buffers. And of course the Joshua faction buff doesn't do a whole lot for RYO other than the stats, because he has 0 AoE skills. But believe it or not, RYO might actually do pretty well with Angelica as his buffer. Angelica has a skill that can change class for a hero, and even though RYO has ways of handling that shortcoming for himself, it is still kind of an interesting option to think about if you decide to use RYO. If you're focused on PvE, a lot of these issues actually kind of evaporate, and RYO ends up being a really great unit in PvE. Matthew's a lot more usable in PvE, and nobody's gonna ban your Landius in PvE. So what you end up with is a guy with a lot of attack, sometimes a lot of damage boost, strong soldiers, with a nice selection of low cooldown single target skills. The biggest downside you might see is that he won't be able to maintain his armor all the time. However, it is worth noting that compared to his fellow Time faction protagonists Yusuke and Rin, when RYO loses his special buff, he doesn't get some huge downside to it. Yusuke gets his damage down and Rin gets his silence, but RYO just loses the armor. And if it's a long enough fight, RYO will get it back in a few turns. As far as specific fights in PvE go, he's obviously a great option for Phoenix. He's on faction, he's physically bulky, and he can put out a lot of damage. The biggest downside there is that he has some limitation in movement, so he might have some trouble reaching the adds if you need someone for that. As for Ancient Beckoning, he could probably do a lot of damage in Nidhogg, but in a lot of high-end strategies for that fight, there's a lot of competition. And Ryo's physical bulk is also wasted there because so many of the enemies do magic damage in that fight. But with his PvE performance out of the way, let's get to the burning question I know most of you have. Is Ryo viable in PvP or not? Many people have noted the conspicuous lack of Ryos running around on the Chinese server. There's a few reasons for this. First, while Ryo's kill potential is very high, and a couple tests have shown that in the right situation Ryo can get a one-shot on pretty much every tank in the game, except for maybe Juggler, believe it or not. The eternal problem for tank busters like Ryo is that you're always going to be running into some very skillful RNG, whether it be Heavy Shield or Bloodline Magic Armor or whatever it is you might be running into. These obviously can really ruin your day, and for Ryo he doesn't have a whole lot of recourse when he fails that kill. For example, if Yulia fails her kill on a tank, she still put up Godly Menace and she might be able to blow up some squishy unit next turn. Ryo doesn't really have anything like that. He's just damage, damage, damage. So if he fails that tank kill, you might be in a bit of trouble. The other problem, which might be obvious, is his movement range. There are just so many high mobility units in the game right now. Units that can move 8, 9, 10 blocks or even more. Ryo just kinda saunters around with his 3 base movement, along with a +1 from his armor, and a +1 from Apex boots if you want those. This wouldn't necessarily be a problem if Ryo was super tanky, which on the physical side he's pretty tanky, probably at least as tanky as Rin. But he has basically 0 defenses against magic. Pretty much any competent mage is going to one-shot Ryo. Although it is worth noting that Ryo does have Empress's Personal Guard as one of his soldier choices, and it's been said he can actually survive Kayura if he puts these out front, so that's something at least. Overall, Ryo is just a great single target unit, but it's pretty clear he has some pretty significant weaknesses, especially for PvP. Alright, now we have Kayura, one of the big rivals to the Ronin Warriors. So in Langrisser, this lady is going to be an assassin, but she actually does magic damage instead of physical, and that alone is enough to make her horrifying. But she has a whole lot going for her other than just that. She's got great movement, she's got a bit of anti-AoE in her kit, she can do some off-healing, and she has Gospel to support her team if you really need it. On top of that, this girl is in the Dark Mythical and Time factions. Basically, the only thing that would have made this better if she had the Tensei faction there instead of the Time faction. She fits in quite well with the Dark and Mythical type strategies, and both of those are still pretty strong factions in the meta. Now, like most assassins, Kayura doesn't find a whole lot of use in PvE. Her damage potential is usually lower than a standard mage. A lot of PvE maps involve tanks that can only guard physical, so her guard piercing ability is actually kind of wasted there. And her off-healing potential is generally speaking outdone by units like Rachel, Chris, or even the 2 SSR Jessicas. Nevertheless, if you need another single target mage on Leviar, she'll do okay there, although I really wouldn't bother taking her into Fenrir unless you really don't have anybody else. Where Kayura shines is really her PvP performance. Where do I even start with that? Well, first, just the fact that she's a magic assassin is bad news for a lot of the slow, bulky DPS that people like playing. Bernhard, for example, generally dies to Kayura, Altmuller has a good chance of dying, Deedlit has a good chance of dying, while Taru might run into some trouble depending on his build, and of course Kayura's banner companion, Ryo, can also die to her if he's not careful. Although I think it goes without saying that being a magic assassin means that Kayura will miss kills on some units that physical assassins would typically have no real trouble with. Mages with sorceresses can be built to survive Kayura, Rin has a decent chance to survive because he's Rin, and Luna of course just laughs at Kayura, even with her talent being what it is. Now of course Kayura can just swap out her sorceresses for the faceless assassins, and that helps to expand her kill list a bit. But even aside from Kayura's ability to assassinate, she just has so much going for her. First, she has a bit of anti-AoE in her talent. She basically has a mini juggler talent of sorts, where she heals people after getting AoE'd. It's nowhere near as strong as jugglers, but of course you need to remember all the other things Kayura is doing for you while also offering this. Kayura with her 3C passive active also has base 6 movement, and with the range staff she can actually get up to 4 attack range as well, so she's great for zoning as well. And finally she has some off-heal ability. It's nowhere near on the level of someone like Rachel or Chris. It is however possible to bolster that aspect of her by giving her a gift of eternal life in her holy class. Now with all these things going for her, you might be thinking, okay, so what's the downside here? Well, the most notable weakness for Kayura is her absolute lack of damage mods almost anywhere in her kit. She does have crit damage, but that's different from damage. So this means that units with damage reduction of some kind are going to give her a really hard time. She can get around that weakness a bit by equipping Twilight Star, which is probably why it was the most popular accessory to put on her on the Chinese server. But even with that, she's going to run into problems sometimes. And Twilight Star does have a sort of counter in the Glory of the World Helm. But even with all that being said, it's probably a pretty good sign for a unit with all this damage, movement, and utility when the only downside I can think to say is she might fail to kill people sometimes. If you're into PvP, Kayura is almost a must-pull. She's going to be a very popular DPS going forward. And while there are some additions down the line, like Christiane, who might make it harder for her to do her job, that's not enough to change the fact that she's probably one of the strongest and versatile units to be added for the next several months.
Alright, thanks for those great summaries, and thanks for all the excellent work you do for the community over at Wikigrisser. It's definitely a super valuable resource that I use for all of my own videos. The only thing I will add is that Kayura does appear in most of the chart-topping scores for Fenrir in Ancient Beckoning, mostly accompanied by Patsir. The most recent runs I've seen have one character taking the AoE rune, and then Bernhardt and Kayura taking turns with the fixed and magic damage runes. Obviously, you'll definitely be able to hit S rank without her, but if you're really intense about leaderboarding, she'll be a strong consideration. Alright, let's take a quick look at the free character you'll be able to get from the Secret Realm event when it gets into full swing. Just don't try to summon for him, he's not actually on this banner. I'm talking of course about Toma Hashiba, who's an archer who gets boosted attack from his talent, disables enemy passives before dealing damage, and also has a similar kind of situational armor as RYO. If he ends his turn with no allies immediately adjacent to him, he gets more attack, +1 range, and becomes immune to debuffs for 3 turns. His 3C skill is a relatively simple line AoE that removes buffs and deals fixed damage. He's a member of Strategic Masters, buffed by Ultimuller and Lanford, and Heroes of Time, buffed by Joshua, Angelica, and Yusuke. So there is a fairly decent spread of factions on this event. Okay, so here's the quick and dirty. We have RYO Sanada, who's a strong single-target, double-attacking DPS, and we have Kayura, who's a top-tier meta magical assassin. She has Gospel, a teleport after battle, and some passive team healing, and she's a top DPS option versus Fenrir. Time for the notes for noobs. If you're a newer player with a newer account, or you just don't mind a verdict-style summary to help you digest all that information, should you summon? Kayura is going to be a core meta unit for PvP for the foreseeable future. She is good in PvE too. Summon for her. RYO Sanada is on a banner with Kayura, so if you get him while you're summoning for her, so be it. He's not going to be necessary for anything, but if you're a collector or a big fan of Ronin Warriors, then you'll want to add him to your barracks for that reason alone. Otherwise, you don't need to try really hard specifically for him. Finally, just the usual reminder about upcoming banners. Next week we should be getting a Raid Up banner featuring Hilda and Yulia. There's also maybe a chance that we'll get the missing Gerald and Layla, Knight of Mystery and Alusha banner from last week, either alongside Hilda and Yulia, or worse, instead of it. We'll see. The week after that, we should be getting a new Langrisser Reincarnation Destiny banner with Ares, Nomi, and Maya. The next major update will feature Lucretia and Emperor Autocrato IV, and Lucretia is even more powerful and versatile than Kayura, if you can believe that. This is one of the biggest 1-2 punches to the Trinity voucher supply in recent memory, so be prepared. Alright, that's it for this episode. Hopefully you found these summaries helpful enough to be worth a little thumbs up. Let us know in the comments if you had any luck summoning for Kayura, and what did it cost. Also, please give Fjarlar some love in the comments for his hard work on this collab. So thanks so much for watching, best of luck to everyone, and I'll catch you all in the next Should You Summon. Extra special thanks of course to our Langrisser tier channel members Levitt, Derek Gunderson, Kyle Greer-Brown, William Householder, and Kate Soon, as well as all of our gold tier channel members for your generous support. Thanks so much.